The summer Caleb Denton turned 13 was the summer the heat came early to Morrow Creek, Tennessee, and stayed the way trouble always stays longer than anyone wanted and with no regard for the plans of the people it inconvenienced. By the second week of June, the thermometer on the porch of the Texaco station on Birchwood Road had climbed past 94 and held there like it had made a decision. The air smelled like hot asphalt and cut grass and the particular heaviness of a southern summer that has not yet decided whether it intends to break. Caleb didn't mind the heat, not exactly. You didn't mind things when you didn't have the luxury of minding them. What he minded, in the quiet, specific way that 13-year-old boys mind things without knowing how to say so, was the look on his mother's face at the kitchen table on Friday nights when she opened the bills. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. His mother, Diane Denton, was 36 years old and had been since a long time before she looked it. She had brown hair she kept pulled back in a clip because there wasn't time for anything more, and hands that were red at the knuckles from the dish soap at the Sunrise Diner, where she worked the breakfast and lunch shifts 6 days a week. She was not a woman who complained. Caleb had heard her say once to her friend Renee on the phone, in the particular voice adults use when they think children aren't listening, that complaining was a luxury same as anything else, and she didn't see the point in spending energy she didn't have on a thing that changed nothing. So she didn't complain. She just opened the bills and did the math, and her face did the thing it did, and Caleb watched it from across the table pretending to do homework and filed the information away in the careful private ledger he kept of things that worried him about their life. The situation, as best as Caleb understood it from years of careful listening, was this. His father, Robert Denton, had left when Caleb was 8. Not dramatically, not with a fight that Caleb could point to as the reason. He had simply, over the course of a winter, become someone who was less and less present until one March morning he was not present at all. There had been a note on the kitchen table. Caleb had not been allowed to read it. He had watched his mother read it twice, fold it once along the existing crease, and put it in the drawer under the telephone where she kept important documents. He had never seen the note again. He had also, in the 5 years since, not seen his father. There were Christmas cards the first 2 years, and then not even those. What his father had left behind, besides the note and the absence, was a mortgage that was 3 months behind on a house on Clover Avenue that his mother had been slowly, stubbornly, with a ferocious and private dedication, catching up on ever since. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window above the sink that faced the backyard, a living room where the couch had a cushion that sank on the left side. It was the only house Caleb had ever lived in. He would have done almost anything to keep it. He understood by the time he was 10 that the calculus of their life was tight in a way that did not allow for much. He understood it the way children understand things their parents never directly explained to them, through accumulation, through the crackers counted into the bag, through the way his mother paused just slightly before saying yes or no when he asked for something, the pause itself being the real answer regardless of what came after it. He had stopped asking for things that cost money approximately 2 years before the summer in question. He had started, that same summer, looking for ways to change the math. The lawn mower had belonged to his grandfather on his mother's side, a man named Curtis Webb who had died of a heart attack when Caleb was 4 and who existed now primarily as a photograph on the hallway wall. A big-shouldered man with a wide smile and grease under his fingernails from the automotive shop he had run for 30 years on the east side of Morrow Creek. Curtis Webb had believed in doing things right and keeping things that still worked, and his lawn mower was evidence of both convictions. It was a push mower, red, heavy, with a pull cord that required commitment and occasionally a small argument before it yielded. Caleb had found it in the shed behind the house the summer he was 10 and had taken it apart with the focused, methodical attention he brought to mechanical things and then put it back together correctly, which was more than most adults would have managed. He had been mowing their own lawn with it since he was 11. The idea came to him the way most of his ideas came, not as a plan, but as a noticing. He was cutting their grass on a Saturday morning in early June, the heat already established by 9 o'clock, and he paused at the back fence and looked across the alley at the yard behind the house on Caldwell Street. The house was a white Victorian with green shutters and a wide front porch and the kind of flower beds that had once, clearly, been the pride of someone who took them seriously. The backyard was less impressive. The grass was tall enough that it had started to go to seed at the tips, which meant it hadn't been cut in at least 3 weeks, probably 4. There was a bird bath near the fence that had a crack in the basin and a garden bench with peeling paint and a collection of terracotta pots along the back steps that held plants which were clearly struggling in the heat, without anyone to water them consistently. He had seen the woman who lived there. He had seen her in the way you see a neighbor on a street you walk past every day peripherally, without real attention, as a component of the landscape rather than a person. She was old, white-haired, small. She moved carefully, the way people move when they have learned to treat their own body with a caution that wasn't always necessary. She had a cat that sat on the front porch railing with the settled authority of an animal that understood its own permanence in a place. Caleb had registered all of this the way you register stop signs, and had given it approximately the same further consideration, which was none. He looked at the overgrown grass. He looked at his own lawn, half-finished, the line of cut and uncut grass a clean diagonal across the yard. He thought about the math on the kitchen table. He thought about the note in the drawer. He finished his own lawn first. Then he went inside, drank a glass of water standing at the sink, and went back out. He pushed the mower through the gate, down the alley, and knocked on the back door of the White House on Caldwell Street. The woman who answered was smaller than he had registered from a distance. She stood in the doorway in a house dress printed with small yellow flowers and looked at him through the screen door with the careful expression of someone who had learned that unexpected knocks required assessment before response. Her eyes, he noticed, were sharp, not suspicious exactly, but paying attention in a way that expected to be paid attention back. "Can I help you?" Her voice was steady, a little rough at the edges, the voice of someone who had once had a larger life and carried the remnants of its volume. Caleb held the mower handle. He said, "My name is Caleb. I live 2 houses back on Clover. I was cutting our grass and I noticed yours needs doing. I thought I could do it for you, if you want." She looked at him through the screen. Then she looked at the mower. Then she looked back at him. "How much do you charge?" He had not thought about this specifically, which he recognized immediately as an oversight. He thought about it quickly, in the way that you do when you are 13 and an adult has asked you a direct question and you cannot afford to seem uncertain. He thought about the mortgage that was catching up. He thought about his mother's hands at the keyboard on Friday nights. He thought about the fact that the woman in the yellow flower house dress was standing in a door frame, holding it open with one hand, and there was something in how she held it that suggested holding things up was taking some effort. "Whatever you think is fair," he said. It was not the answer he had planned. He wasn't sure where it came from. It seemed to him the right thing to say, and he had not yet learned to second-guess that instinct. She studied him for another moment. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. He would learn this in the next 10 minutes. She was 77 years old. She had lived in the White House on Caldwell Street for 41 years, since the summer she and her husband Thomas had bought it new and spent 3 weekends painting the shutters and planting the flower beds that had once, clearly, been someone's pride. Thomas had been gone for 9 years. She had 2 children, a son named Franklin who lived in Nashville and called on her birthday and at Christmas with the reliable precision of someone who has decided that regular contact and genuine presence are the same thing, which they are not, and a daughter named Patricia who lived 40 minutes away in Clearwater, in a house Eleanor had visited 7 times in 4 years, and who came to Caldwell Street on average once a month, sometimes less, with the specific energy of a person discharging an obligation rather than fulfilling a relationship. Caleb did not know any of this yet. He just knew the grass was long and the woman at the door was holding the frame. She unlatched the screen. "Come around front and start there," she said. "The front's worse. And when you're done, come to the back steps. I'll have lemonade." He went around front. The front was worse. It took him 45 minutes. The mower complained twice about the height of the growth, and he had to go back over 2 sections where the grass had been too thick the first pass, but he got it done. He edged along the front walk by hand with the small edger his grandfather had also left in the shed, because once he had started he could see that the edging needed doing, and a thing worth doing was worth doing right. When he was finished, the yard looked like itself again, or like the yard it had been trying to be under the weight of the neglect. She was on the back steps when he came around. 2 glasses of lemonade on the step beside her, made from actual lemons, which he could tell from the color and the small seeds at the bottom of the glass. She handed him one, and he drank half of it in the first swallow because the heat had been significant and the work had been real. She looked at the yard. She looked at it the way a person looks at something they had been watching get away from them and have now been given back. "You edged," she said. It was not quite a question. "My grandfather said if you're going to do a thing, do it like you mean it." Her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something in that direction. "Your grandfather sounds like he was a sensible man. He had a shop on the east side. Webb's Automotive. He passed 4 years before I was actually old enough to remember much." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the yard. Then she said, "Your grandfather's shop is the one that fixed my Thomas's Buick for 22 years. Curtis Webb." Caleb looked at her. "That's my grandfather." She turned and looked at him with the full weight of her attention, which was considerable. "Well," she said. She said it with the particular quality of someone encountering a fact that has dimensions they hadn't anticipated. "Well, I'll be," she told him later, sitting on the back steps while the evening came in slowly and the light went from gold to amber over the yard, that Curtis Webb had been a good man, that Thomas had trusted no one else with the Buick, and that when Curtis died, Thomas had gone to the funeral even though they had never been social, had never been to each other's houses, because that was the kind of thing you did for a man who had done right by you for 2 decades. She told him this with the straightforward certainty of someone reporting established fact rather than reminiscing, and Caleb listened the way his mother had taught him to listen to old people, which was the way you listen to maps, because the information might matter later. He did not plan to come back. That is the honest truth of it. He thought of it as a one-time thing, the way you think of holding a door or picking up something a stranger has dropped. A single right action, completed. He went home that evening and ate dinner and told his mother he had picked up a lawn job, and she looked at him across the table with an expression he could not fully decode, something between pride and a sadness she did not intend him to see, and she said, "That's a good initiative, Caleb," and passed the salad. The next Saturday he was in the alley, and he looked at the yard on Caldwell Street, and the grass had grown back the way grass does in a Tennessee June, insistently, with no regard for anyone's intentions. He stood there for a moment with the mower handle in both hands. Then he went and knocked on the back door. She opened it before he finished knocking, as though she had been expecting him or had been sitting near enough to a window that the sound of the mower in the alley had been sufficient notice. She said, "Well, you came back." He said, "It needs doing again." She said, "It does." He said, "I'll need to do the beds this time, too, if that's all right. The weeds are coming up along the fence." She said, "The trowel is in the shed. 3rd shelf. And the lemonade will be ready at the same time as last week." That was how it started. Not with a plan, not with a decision, not with the particular kind of intentionality that makes for a clean story. It started with a lawn that needed doing and a boy who noticed and a woman who opened her door. And then it continued the way most important things continue, not with drama, but with the quiet repetition of the right thing done again and again and again. By the 4th week, it was simply the thing he did on Saturday mornings. He cut their own lawn first, always, and then he pushed the mower down the alley to the gate behind Eleanor Marsh's house on Caldwell Street and went to work. The work expanded naturally. The first month it was grass and edging. The second month he fixed the crack in the bird bath with a tube of waterproof sealant he bought with $3 of his own money, without saying anything about it. She noticed. She did not say anything about it either. That was a kind of understanding. In July, he replaced 2 boards on the garden bench that had rotted through. He found the boards in the shed, the same shed with the trowel and the rake and 40 years of accumulated useful objects that Thomas Marsh had collected on the apparent theory that a thing that could be used should be kept. The shed itself was a small museum of a certain kind of man, orderly and practical, and full of the evidence of someone who had believed in taking care of things. Caleb spent an hour in there one morning before Eleanor came out, and he had the feeling, standing among those careful shelves, of being in the presence of someone he had not met. "Her husband sounds like he was the kind of man who fixed things," he said when she came to the door. She looked at the shed and then back at him with an expression that was precise and careful, the way you look at something you have thought about from many angles over a long time. "He was," she said. "He believed the world worked better with more fixed things in it, and fewer broken ones." She paused. He was usually right about that. There were mornings she watched from the kitchen window, and mornings she came out and sat in the garden chair he had moved into the shade of the oak tree at the corner of the yard. On the mornings she sat outside, they talked. Not at length, not always, but in the incremental way that two people talk when they are sharing space and time regularly, when the conversation has nowhere in particular it needs to get to and can therefore go where it actually wants to go. She asked him about school. He gave her the real version, not the one for adults who wanted to hear that things were fine. He told her that math was easier than English because in math the answer existed and you could find it, whereas in English the answer was always someone's opinion, which seemed to him a less reliable system. She had laughed at that, a short, sharp laugh that surprised him because he had not expected it from her. She said she had taught English for 22 years at Morrow Creek High School, and she agreed with him entirely, which she considered a significant professional concession, and that she hoped he would keep it to himself. He asked her about the garden. She told him the names of things, not just what they were called, but what they were. The camellia against the south fence that bloomed every March and that Thomas had planted the year they moved in from a cutting his mother had given them from her own garden. The fig tree in the corner that was older than both of them and that produced, in a good year, more figs than one person could reasonably use, and that she had been making preserves from for 30 years. The roses along the back wall, 7 varieties, each one with a history she could recite with the precision of someone for whom the history and the plant had long since become inseparable. He learned the names. He learned which needed deadheading and when. He learned that the fig tree needed pruning in late winter and that the timing mattered more than people thought, and that the camellias did not like too much water in August. He learned these things the way you learn from a person who knows something completely, which is differently from the way you learn from a book. More slowly, more specifically, more lastingly. His mother asked him once, in the fall of that first year, what exactly he and the old woman on Caldwell Street talked about all that time. He thought about how to answer. He said, "She tells me about her garden, and I tell her about school, and mostly we just talk about things." His mother looked at him in the particular way she had, the look that meant she was seeing something he hadn't asked her to see. She said, "That's good, Caleb. She sounds like she's good for you." He said, "I think I might be a little good for her too." His mother had not said anything to that. She had just pressed her hand briefly to the side of his face and then gone back to whatever she had been doing, and Caleb had understood from the warmth of it that she agreed. The money helped. He had not known what to charge that first day, and so he had said whatever you think is fair, and Eleanor Marsh had thought $20 was fair for the mowing and edging, and had pressed it into his hand at the back door with the directness of someone who had long since made peace with the transaction of paying people properly for work. He had tried to say it was too much, and she had looked at him with the expression that he was coming to understand meant the subject was closed. $20, she said, for the mowing. What you do extra, that's your own business. He accepted it. He did not accept it easily, but he accepted it, and over the course of weeks he began to understand that accepting it properly, without performing reluctance, was part of respecting her. $20 a week was $80 a month. In the economy of the Denton household on Clover Avenue, $80 a month was not nothing. It was, to be precise, it was the electric bill in the light months, or half of it in the heavy ones. It was the difference between the mortgage payment that fit and the one that didn't. Caleb gave all of it to his mother the first month, laying it on the kitchen table on a Friday night, without ceremony. She looked at the bills and then at him, and he watched her face do something complicated and then resolve into something that was not quite either pride or grief, but contained both. "You don't have to give me all of it," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to." She picked up the money and put it in the envelope she kept in the kitchen drawer and didn't say anything else about it that night. But the next morning, Saturday, she made him his favorite breakfast, which was biscuits from scratch with butter and her mother's strawberry jam. And she put the plate in front of him and sat across from him and drank her coffee and watched him eat with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. He was 14 by the time the second summer came. He had grown 2 inches and his voice had started doing things he had not been consulted about. He had also, in the 10 months of Saturday mornings on Caldwell Street, learned more about soil composition, pruning technique, and the particular preferences of the camellia than he had learned about any comparable subject in any classroom. Eleanor Marsh was a precise and exacting teacher when she decided to teach something, which was not how he would have described her initially, but was exactly what he would have said if anyone had asked him by November. She had taught high school English for 22 years, and the habits of a teacher do not retire when the teacher does. She had opinions about how things should be done, and she expressed them with the economy of someone who had spent decades getting the essential point across in the minimum number of words. "You're rushing the edging," she said once, in the way that contained an entire corrective essay in 6 words. He slowed down. The result was better. That was how it worked with her. She talked about Thomas more as the months went on, not with the specific sadness of fresh loss, but with the settled weight of someone who has absorbed an absence so completely that it is no longer separate from the ordinary texture of daily life. Thomas had been a high school history teacher. They had met at a conference in Nashville in 1971 and been married 8 months later, which she acknowledged was fast, and which she also maintained was precisely the right amount of time, given what they both already knew. He had been the one who planted the camellia and pruned the fig tree and kept the shed organized with the conviction that the world worked better with more fixed things and fewer broken ones. He had also been the one who brought her coffee every morning before she was awake enough to make it herself. For 38 years, which was the detail she mentioned most often, Caleb noticed, and which she always mentioned with the same specific pause afterward. He thought about what it would cost, in the arithmetic of daily life, to lose a thing like that. A person who brought you coffee before you were awake enough to make it. He thought about his mother on the couch on Sunday mornings, the left cushion sinking, her hands wrapped around her own mug. He thought about what it was like to do the small necessary things alone. He thought he understood Eleanor Marsh a little better every time she mentioned the coffee. Her daughter Patricia came one Saturday in October while Caleb was working in the front beds. A silver car turned into the drive, and a woman in her mid-40s got out carrying a bag from a bakery chain downtown. She walked up the front path without looking at the yard, or if she looked, without registering the looking as something worth acknowledging. She went inside. 45 minutes later, she came back out with the same bag, slightly lighter, got into the silver car, and left. Caleb was still in the beds when Eleanor came to the front door and stood on the porch with her arms crossed and watched the car back out of the drive. Her expression was the careful, controlled expression of a person managing something they have long since given up, expecting to be different. She stood there until the car had turned the corner and gone. Then she said to Caleb, without particular emphasis, "Patricia thinks I should consider a retirement facility." He pulled a weed and set it in the basket. He did not say anything. "She appreciates the idea of me having more support," Eleanor continued, in the precise tone of someone quoting a phrase they found exactly as insufficient as it sounded. He pulled another weed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have support." And she went back inside. He thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. He thought about it on the walk home, the mower bumping along the sidewalk behind him. He thought about what it meant to be 77 years old in a house that had been yours for 41 years, with a shed full of a good man's carefully kept tools, and a camellia that bloomed every March, and a fig tree older than everyone you knew. And to have a daughter who came for 45 minutes with a bakery bag and left with a recommendation. He thought about what Eleanor had said with the particular flatness that meant it hurt, but she was not going to perform the hurt for anyone. "I have support." He thought, "She means me." He was not sure what to do with that. He was 14, and the sum of his experience with large emotional facts was that you carried them, and you kept going, and eventually they settled into something you could name. He kept going. He came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. The winter that year was mild for Tennessee, which meant the grass slowed but did not stop entirely, and the garden needed less cutting and more of the other things. The careful covering of the more delicate plants before the cold nights, the mulching of the beds, the pruning work he had started to understand in the way that you understand something physical, not from being told, but from the doing of it enough times that your hands know before your mind catches up. Eleanor supervised the pruning with the attention of a conductor. Not because she doubted his competence, she told him once, but because pruning done wrong took years to undo, and she had not lived 77 years to watch her camellias suffer for someone's impatience. He had started keeping a small notebook, a spiral-bound one he'd gotten from the school supply drive, technically meant for homework, but repurposed. He wrote down the things she told him. Which plants needed what, which month, which treatment, the specific varieties of rose, and their particular histories, the right depth to mulch the fig tree roots against a hard freeze. He was not entirely sure why he was writing it down. He just felt that it was information that should not be lost. Franklin, the son in Nashville, called on a Sunday afternoon while Caleb was fixing a gate latch that had come loose in the October wind. He heard the phone ring through the open kitchen window and heard Eleanor answer it with a warmth in her voice that was different from her everyday warmth, deeper and less guarded, the voice a person uses with the people who have been in their life long enough to earn its full register. He heard the conversation in fragments, not the words but the rhythm of it, the long listening and the shorter answering, the specific quality of a person reporting on their own life to someone who is genuinely asking. He fixed the latch and gathered his tools and went to the back steps to let her know he was done. She came to the door with the phone still in her hand, call finished, and she looked at the gate with the practiced assessment she brought to all completed work. Good, she said. Then my son. He calls every Sunday. He said, I know. She looked at him. He said, I've heard you. She nodded once. He is a good man. She said it with the same plainness she said most things, but with a specific weight underneath it that he recognized by now as Eleanor Marsh's version of the deepest feeling. He is far away and he cannot be here, and he is a good man, and those things are all true at once, and that is something you live with. He understood without her saying any of that. That was how it was between them by then. The second winter brought a cold snap in January that was genuine rather than mild. 3 nights below 20 and a morning of ice that glazed every surface with the thin, treacherous shine that is worse than outright snow because snow announces itself and ice does not. Caleb came that Saturday morning and found the back steps iced over and Eleanor standing just inside the screen door looking at them with the expression of someone doing math. He went to the shed and found the bag of rock salt on the 3rd shelf where it had always been, and he salted the steps and the back walk and the path from the gate to the door and the front steps and the front walk and the steps up to the porch. It took 20 minutes. She watched from inside without commenting. When he came back to the door, she handed him the blue thermos from the counter, the one she kept the coffee in on cold mornings, and said, pour yourself a cup and sit for a minute. It's too cold to pretend otherwise. He sat on the inside step in the warmth of the kitchen doorway and drank the coffee, which was strong in the way that Eleanor Marsh did everything, without apology and exactly as it was meant to be. She stood in the kitchen and looked out the window at the iced yard and said, Thomas used to say that January was the month you found out who your house really was. That in January, all the things you'd been ignoring made themselves known. Caleb turned the thermos cup in his hands. He said, what did you find out about this house this January? She was quiet for a moment. She said that the furnace needs servicing and the weather stripping on the north bedroom window is gone and the step on the back porch is going to need replacing before spring. He said, I can look at the step. She looked at him over her shoulder. She said, I know you can. She did not say anything else, but she refilled the thermos cup without being asked and set it on the step beside him and went back to looking out the window, and that was all the answer either of them needed. He was 15 by the spring of the 2nd year. He had grown another inch, and the work in the garden had built something in his shoulders that had not been there before. He had also, in the 18 months of Saturday mornings, accumulated a specific and detailed understanding of the garden on Caldwell Street that he suspected was greater than Eleanor's own daughter possessed. He knew where every plant was, what it needed, and what it had been. He knew that the rose on the southeast corner was the first one Thomas had planted, a peace rose, yellow edged with pink, that had been a gift from Eleanor to Thomas rather than the other way around, on their first anniversary, which she mentioned once and which he thought about every time he deadheaded it. He knew that the fig tree produced better in the years when the winter had been cold enough, that the cold was not its enemy but its requirement, that it needed the dormancy to be fully itself when the season came. He had written all of this in the notebook, and the notebook was full. He asked her once, on a warm April morning when the camellia had just finished its bloom and the beds were being turned for the spring planting, whether she had ever thought about writing any of this down. She was in the garden chair under the oak tree, and she looked at him with the sharp blue eyes that paid full attention and said, what would I write down? The history of a garden. Everything I know about it. She was quiet for a moment. She said, everything I know about this garden is already written down in this garden. He thought about that. He said, but what happens to it when? He did not finish the sentence. She looked at him in the way that meant she knew what he had not said. She said, when I'm gone, do you mean? He said he supposed that was what he meant. She said, well, she let the word settle. She said, I suppose that depends on who's left who knows how to read it. He looked at the garden. He thought about the notebook. He thought about 18 months of Saturday mornings and the names of things and the histories of things and the specific knowledge that accumulates in a person when they have paid full attention for long enough. He thought about what it means to read a garden. He thought he was beginning to understand. He went home that afternoon and sat at the kitchen table and opened the notebook to the first page. He had started it in October of the first year, the first cold weekend, when Eleanor had explained the mulching schedule, and he had thought it was information that should not be lost. He read through it from the beginning. The names, the dates, the specific instructions, the histories Eleanor had told him as they worked. The camellia from Thomas's mother's garden. The peace rose for the first anniversary. The fig tree older than both of them. The particular depth for the mulch. The right month for the pruning. His own handwriting, careful and a little cramped in the way of someone who writes slowly because they want to get it right. Page after page of a garden that belonged to a woman who had made it over 41 years with a man who believed the world worked better with more fixed things and fewer broken ones. His mother was at the sink when he came into the kitchen. She looked at the notebook. "What's that?" he said. "I've been keeping notes on the garden." She looked at him for a moment with the expression she had that meant she was seeing something he hadn't asked her to see. She said, "Does she know you do that?" He thought about it. He said, "She knows I pay attention." His mother turned back to the sink. She said, "That might be worth more than you know." He looked at the notebook. He thought he was beginning to understand what she meant. He went back the next Saturday. It was May by then, warm and clear, the kind of morning that comes to Tennessee in spring like an apology for January. The yard was green, and the camellia was done, but the roses were starting, and the fig tree had leafed out fully with the reliable extravagance of something that has wintered correctly and is now exactly itself. Caleb pushed the gate open and stood for a moment looking at it. All of it. The way you look at something you have become part of without quite planning to. Eleanor was on the back steps with the lemonade already made. She looked at the yard the same way he did. She said, "It's a good year for the roses." He said, "The peace rose is going to be spectacular." She looked at him with the full weight of her attention. She said, "How do you know that?" He said, "I've been watching it since October." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, I suppose you have." She handed him the lemonade. They looked at the garden together in the May morning. The light was coming through the oak tree in the particular way it did at that hour, and the birds were doing what birds do in Tennessee in spring, with total commitment and no regard for the quiet. He thought, "I have been coming here every Saturday for 2 years." He thought, "This is the longest I have ever done anything except live in the house on Clover Avenue." He thought, "I don't think I'm going to stop." She said, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her. Her voice had a quality to it he had not heard before. Not troubled, not afraid, but deliberate in the way of a person who has been deciding for a long time how to say a specific thing and has now arrived at the saying of it. He said, "All right." She said, "I've been thinking about the garden, about what it requires to keep it right." She paused. "About who will keep it right after I can no longer keep it right myself." He held the lemonade glass and looked at the garden and did not say anything. She said, "I have been watching you for 2 years, Caleb." She said his name the way she said the names of things that mattered to her. Precisely, with the full weight of the word given its due. She said, "I want you to know that I have seen you very clearly." He thought he should say something. He could not think of what. She said, "I have something I need to do, and I wanted you to know, before I do it, that it comes from what I have seen. Not from charity and not from sentiment. From what I have seen." He looked at her. She was looking at the garden. She said, "The camellia will bloom in March regardless of who is paying attention. But it blooms better when someone is." She said it with the quietness she used for the things she was most certain of, and then she did not say anything more. And they sat in the May morning and drank the lemonade, and the roses held their color against the green of the yard, and the garden was everything it had been worked to be, and Caleb Denton, 15 years old, and the son of a woman who opened bills on Friday nights, and the grandson of a man who had fixed things for 30 years on the east side of Morrow Creek, sat on the back steps of the White House on Caldwell Street and felt, without knowing why, that something was beginning. He just didn't know yet what it was. He thought about what she had said for the rest of that week. He thought about it on the bus to school on Monday morning, and at his desk in second period, and on the walk home through the neighborhood, where the May light was doing the particular thing it did in Tennessee in the hours before dinner, going long and gold across the yards and the sidewalks and the tops of the cars parked along Clover Avenue. He thought about it the way he thought about math problems that had not resolved yet, with the patient background attention of someone who trusts the answer exists and is waiting for the right angle of approach. The thing Eleanor had said was not a complete sentence in the sense of telling him anything specific. She had not explained what she needed to do, or what precisely she had seen, or what it was she expected would happen after the saying of it. She had said it the way she said most things that mattered, with economy and precision and the full assumption that the person listening was capable of carrying the weight of what had been left unsaid. Caleb had come to understand this about her over 2 years. Eleanor Marsh did not explain herself to people who did not deserve the explanation, and she did not withhold herself from the people who did. The fact that she had said what she said meant that she had decided he deserved it. He did not take that lightly. He also did not ask his mother about it. He considered it. His mother was the person he talked to about most things, and this felt like most things. But it also felt like something that needed to settle in him first before it could be spoken aloud, the way certain facts need time before they are ready to be words. He kept it, for now, in the same place he kept the notebook. Internal. Specific. Waiting. June came, and the routine of summer reasserted itself with the particular authority it always had, the long hot days, and the early light, and the way time moved differently when school was out, slower in the mornings and faster in the afternoons, and compressed oddly around the edges of the day. Caleb worked more in the summer. He had picked up a second lawn job in April, a neighbor on the far end of Birchwood Road whose husband had thrown his back out, and who had asked Caleb with the directness of someone used to solving problems directly, whether he could take over the mowing for the season. He had said yes. He had also started, quietly, and without making a production of it, helping Mrs. Ortega 2 streets over with her vegetable garden on Thursday evenings. Mrs. Ortega was 81 and grew tomatoes and peppers and collard greens with the serious agricultural commitment of someone for whom a garden was not a hobby, but a relationship with the earth that had been going on longer than most friendships. She paid him in tomatoes, which he brought home to his mother, and occasionally in $20 bills that she pressed into his hand with the look of a woman who had made up her mind and was not interested in discussion. Between the 3 jobs and his own yard, Caleb was working most of the week. He did not think of it as working. He thought of it as the thing he did, the way his mother thought of the diner as the thing she did, not as a burden, but as the shape his contribution to their life had taken. Eleanor noticed the summer tiredness in him one July morning when he came to the gate and stood for a moment with his forearms on the top rail and the mower handle in one hand, looking at the yard with the assessment he always brought to it. She came to the back door and looked at him and said, "You're tired." He said, "I'm fine." She said, "I didn't ask how you were. I said you're tired. There's a difference." He looked at her. She said, "Come have coffee before you start." He said the grass wouldn't cut itself. She said, "No, but it will wait 15 minutes, and you will do it better when you've sat down." He came and had the coffee. She was right. He always did it better after. They talked that morning about school, about what came after school, which was a conversation that had acquired weight as the summer progressed, and his junior year of high school was approaching with the particular implication of junior year, which is that the year after it is senior year, and the year after that is the thing everyone calls the rest of your life. Caleb had not thought about it extensively, because thinking about it extensively required imagining futures that cost money he could not see yet on any horizon. But he had thought about it enough to have a direction, if not a plan. He wanted to do something with plants. He knew that was imprecise, but it was honest. He had spent 2 years learning a specific garden with the attentiveness of a student who genuinely wanted to know what he was learning. And what he had found was that he was not simply learning about plants. He was learning about systems, about how the specific conditions of a place, the light, the soil, the water, the history, the care, produced a particular outcome, and how changing any one of those conditions changed the outcome, and how understanding those relationships at a level of real precision required a kind of intelligence that was not the kind they measured in tests. He wanted to understand that more. He was not sure what that was called, exactly, or where you went to learn it properly. Eleanor set her coffee cup down and said, "There's a program at Crestwood Agricultural College." She said it with the specific neutrality of someone who had been thinking about something and had decided the time had come to say it. Extension horticulture, landscape management. 3 years. They have a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from Blount County. He looked at her. She looked at her coffee cup. "I did some reading," she said. He said, "When did you do reading about this?" She said, "I have been aware of your situation for approximately 18 months. He did not say anything. She said, "You have the aptitude and the discipline. The question is the application, which requires time and attention, and the question of whether you intend to apply, which is your own decision." He said, "You don't think I was going to go to college?" She looked at him directly. She said, "I think that without specific information and a specific push, a great many young people who should go to college do not go to college." She said it the way she said the things she most believed, simply, without requiring him to agree. "I am providing information. The push you can decide about yourself." He took the Crestwood information home. He set it on the kitchen table that Friday night, and his mother looked at it, and then at him, and then at it again, the way she looked at things that surprised her in the direction of good. She said, "Eleanor gave you this?" He said, "She found it." His mother smoothed the edge of the brochure with her thumb. She said, "She's something, isn't she?" He said, "Yeah, she is." The application period was not until the fall, but he started working on it in July. In the evenings after the lawn work was done and dinner was finished, and the house had settled into its summer night quiet, his mother helped him with the essay portion, sitting across the table with her coffee and her reading glasses and the precise editorial instinct she had developed from years of composing the diner's chalkboard specials with maximum information in minimum space. She was better at it than he had expected, and worse at pretending she wasn't moved by what he had written than she probably wanted to be. She handed back a draft once with corrections in the margins and a small watermark in the upper right corner that she did not acknowledge and that he did not mention. He told Eleanor in August that the application was done. She said, "Good." He said, "I don't know if I'll get it." She said, "You'll get it." He said, "You can't know that." She said, "No, but I know what the application looks like because you told me about it, and I know what you are because I've been watching you for 2 years, and in my professional assessment, which is the assessment of someone who evaluated young people for 22 years, you'll get it." He looked at the piece Rose, which was, as he had predicted in May, spectacular. He said, "You evaluated English students." She said, "I evaluated people. English was the mechanism." He almost smiled. He said, "Yes, ma'am. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." It was in September that things began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once. The way the light shifts in September, so gradually that you are suddenly aware of the diminishment without being able to point to the moment it began. Eleanor had a doctor's appointment on the second Thursday of the month. She mentioned it the Saturday before with the economy of someone reporting a fact rather than raising a concern, and Caleb did not think much about it. Old people had doctor's appointments. It was part of the architecture of an old person's week the same way the diner was part of the architecture of his mother's week. But she was different when he came the following Saturday. Not dramatically different, just slightly more careful with herself, slightly more deliberate in her movements, the way a person moves when they are taking an instruction seriously. He noticed it the way you notice things about someone you have spent 2 years observing carefully, the small deviations from the baseline that the baseline makes visible. He did not ask. She did not volunteer. He came the Saturday after, and she was in the garden chair when he arrived rather than on the steps, and the lemonade was already made and waiting on the small table beside the chair, and she was sitting in the morning light with her hands folded and her face tilted toward the sun in the way of someone taking stock of something. He put the mower in the shed and came and stood at the edge of the garden. She opened her eyes. She said, "The doctor says the heart is doing something it's not supposed to." She said it plainly, with the composure of someone who has had time to find the right distance from a fact before reporting it. He said, "What does that mean?" She said, "It means I take more pills and I do less of the things that aggravate it, and I see the cardiologist in October." He said, "What things aggravate it?" She said, "Stress and cold and overexertion." He said, "None of those sound like you." She looked at him. The corner of her mouth moved. She said, "No, they don't particularly. But apparently I don't get a vote on my own cardiac function, and so we accommodate." He stayed later that Saturday. He finished the mowing and the edging and the fall bed preparation that was the September task, covering the more delicate roots against the cold that was still weeks away, but that Eleanor always prepared for early, because preparation was a practice and practices required consistency to work. When he finished, he came and sat on the step near the garden chair, and they sat in the September afternoon, which was beginning, finally, to feel less like summer and more like the thing that comes after, and she told him about the cardiologist's name and the appointment date, and the way the heart's electrical system could misfire with age the way any old system could. And she talked about it with the straightforward informational quality she brought to everything she understood, and he listened the way she had taught him to listen, fully, without filling the space with reassurance she hadn't asked for. He said, "When do you find out more?" She said, "After October." He said, "I'll be here the Saturday after." She said, "I know you will." She said it the way she said the things she was most certain of. Patricia called the following week. He was not there for the call, but Eleanor told him about it the Saturday after with the careful, controlled tone she used for the things that cost her something to discuss with equanimity. Patricia had heard about the heart from Franklin, who had heard from Eleanor on the Sunday call, and Patricia had driven out on a Tuesday, which was not her usual pattern, and had sat in the kitchen with Eleanor for 2 hours and had made what Eleanor described, in the precise language of someone identifying a thing accurately, as a proposal. The proposal was that Eleanor should consider a move, that the house was large for one person and the maintenance was significant, and the medical proximity of a facility designed for people Eleanor's age was something worth thinking about seriously now rather than in a crisis. Eleanor told him this looking at the garden. Her voice was level and careful, and carrying something underneath the level and careful that he had learned to hear. He said, "What did you say to her?" She said, "I said I would think about it." He said, "But you didn't mean it." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I meant that I would think about it in the same way that I think about other things that are not going to happen." She paused. "This is my house, Caleb. Thomas and I built this garden in this house over 41 years. I know every plant in it. I know what it needs and when. I know where he planted the camellia and why and what it looked like the first spring when it bloomed for the first time, and he came and got me from the kitchen so I would see it before he deadheaded it." She stopped. She looked at her hands. She said, "I am not going anywhere." He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He looked at the garden and understood, in the specific way you understand something you have learned from the inside rather than been told, exactly why. He had spent 2 years learning that the garden was not a collection of plants. It was a record. It was every decision they had made about what to put where and why, every spring that had come and proven the decisions right, every correction and every unexpected success. 41 years of two people paying attention to the same piece of ground together. You did not walk away from that. You did not put it in a facility and go somewhere with medical proximity and call that accommodation. He said, "What can I do?" She looked at him. She said, "You're already doing it." He said, "More than that. What else can I do?" She looked at the garden again. She said, "There will be things, as the fall comes, that are heavier than I can manage. The pots need to come in before the first hard freeze, and some of them are too heavy for me to carry safely now. The storm windows need to go up on the north side. The gutters haven't been cleaned since August." He said, "I'll do all of it." She said, "I know you will. That's not what I was asking you." He said, "I know, but it's what I'm offering." October brought the cardiologist appointment and a verdict that was neither as bad as the worst possibility nor as manageable as the best one. Eleanor told him on a Saturday morning in the garden chair, her coffee cooling on the table beside her, that the electrical misfiring was real and consistent and required a monitor that she now wore on her wrist, a small device that logged her heart's behavior the way a weather station logged the weather, with patient electronic indifference to the significance of what it was recording. She wore it with the same composure she wore everything. She said the cardiologist was a thorough man who communicated clearly, which she considered a professional virtue not to be taken for granted. She said the medication adjustment was expected to help. She said they would know more in January. He brought the storm windows up from the basement and fitted them to the north side windows on a Saturday in mid-October. He cleaned the gutters on a morning when the sky was flat and gray and the temperature had dropped enough to make the work uncomfortable but not dangerous. He brought the heavy pots in from the back steps and lined them along the south wall of the shed where the light from the small window fell, which was what Eleanor specified, because the south light was the right light for winter dormancy in a contained space. He did all of it without being asked a second time, and he came back the next Saturday and the next and the one after that, and she was there each time on the steps or in the chair or at the kitchen door, and the lemonade became coffee as October deepened into November, and the garden went into its winter quiet. Franklin came in November. He drove down from Nashville on a Saturday, a man in his early 50s with his mother's sharp eyes and his father's build, who came to the back door and found Caleb raking the last of the oak leaves from the yard and looked at him with an expression of genuine and unperformed surprise. He said, "You must be Caleb." Caleb said, "Yes, sir." He said, "My mother has told me about you." He said it in the way that meant the telling had been real and regular and not incidental. He stood and watched Caleb finish the raking with the attentive assessment of someone taking in information he had heard described and is now seeing with his own eyes. They shook hands when Caleb was done. Franklin had the handshake of a man who meant it, firm and brief, and looking at you when he did it. He said, "She talks about this garden differently since you've been coming." He said it carefully, choosing the word differently with a specific intention. He said, "It used to be that when she talked about the garden, I heard the tense change. Past tense. What it was, what Thomas used to do. Now she talks about it in the present. What needs doing, what's coming in spring." He looked at the raked yard, clean and settled under the November sky. He said, "That matters more than you might know." Caleb did not know what to say to that. He said, "I just do what needs doing." Franklin looked at him steadily with the sharp eyes. He said, "I know. That's what she says, too. That's why it matters." They had lunch inside, the three of them, at the kitchen table where Eleanor had made soup the way she made everything, with total commitment and no compromise, a chicken vegetable that had been on the stove since morning and that filled the house with the particular warmth of a thing that has been attended to properly. Franklin talked about Nashville and about his work, which was civil engineering, and Caleb thought of something Eleanor had said about Thomas and the world working better with more fixed things in it and fewer broken ones. Franklin had the same quality, the same directness, the same sense of a person who understood what they were building and why. At the end of the lunch, Franklin said quietly to Caleb while Eleanor was in the kitchen, "I want to make sure you know that if anything changes, if she needs anything beyond what you're already doing, I want to know." He handed Caleb a business card with a handwritten number on the back. He said, "That's the direct line, not the office. My cell." He said, "I trust you," which from what I understand is something my mother doesn't say about very many people. Caleb looked at the card. He said, "I won't need it." Franklin said, "Probably not, but I want you to have it anyway." He put his hand briefly on Caleb's shoulder and then went back into the kitchen and helped his mother with the dishes, and Caleb sat at the table with the business card in his hand and looked at the garden through the window, quiet and bare and waiting for whatever came next. December arrived, and with it the particular stillness of a southern winter that has committed to being cold without committing to being dramatic about it. No ice storms, no record temperatures, just the gray persistent chill of days that darkened early and stayed dark and required a coat from the moment you stepped outside until the moment you came back in. Eleanor was managing. She was precise about that word, managing, which she used to mean that she was doing what the situation required with the resources available to her, which was how she had always described the business of living and which she did not intend to apply differently now. Caleb came every Saturday. There was less to do in the garden, but more to do in the ways that mattered differently. He checked the pots in the shed on the south wall for moisture and turned the ones that needed turning toward the light. He checked that the storm windows were sealing correctly on the north side. He went to the hardware store on Birchwood and bought new weather stripping for the kitchen door that had been letting cold in along the bottom edge. A $5 fix he handled on a Tuesday afternoon after school because it seemed to him unacceptable to wait until Saturday for something that was costing Eleanor warmth every day. She noticed when he came to do it. He had not told her he was coming. She answered the door and looked at the weather stripping in his hand and the small toolkit he had brought and said, "You didn't have to come on a weekday." He said, "I know." She let him in and made tea while he worked, and when he was done, she ran her hand along the bottom of the door frame and said, "That will make a real difference in January." He said, "I know." She handed him the tea. She said, "Your grandfather would have done exactly the same thing." He looked at her. She said it without sentimentality, as a statement of fact, a piece of information about two people she had assessed accurately over many years. He held the tea and thought about the shed full of careful tools and the man he knew primarily from a photograph and from what lived in the things he had left behind. He got the Crestwood scholarship notification in December. It came in the mail on a Thursday, A letter in a cream envelope with the college's seal in the corner, and he read it standing at the kitchen counter with his coat still on, because he had picked it up from the box on the way in and had not thought to take the coat off first. He read it twice. Then he set it on the counter and took off his coat and read it a third time. Full scholarship, room and board included, for the 3-year horticulture program, starting the following September. First-generation student from Blount County. He called his mother at the diner. She picked up on the second ring with the particular briskness of a person in the middle of the lunch service, and he told her, and there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough for him to hear the background noise of the diner, the clink and clatter and low voices. And then she said his name once in a voice that was not brisk at all. She said she had to go, but she would see him at dinner, and he said all right. She came home 2 hours later, and she held the letter for a long time without speaking, and then she put it on the counter and went and made dinner, and while she was making it she cried, quietly, facing the stove, and he watched her back and did not say anything, because she did not want him to see it, and he loved her enough to pretend he couldn't. He told Eleanor on Saturday. He handed her the letter at the back steps, and she read it with the glasses she had recently started wearing for reading, small wire-framed ones that she treated with the same efficiency she treated everything, as a tool that served a function and was not required to be commented upon. She read it once. Then she folded it and handed it back to him and looked at him over the tops of the glasses in the way of a person whose assessment has been confirmed. Good, she said. He said, you knew? She said, I told you in August. He said, you can't have known. She said, I told you I know what the application looks like, and I know what you are. He looked at the winter garden, gray and still and patient. He said, thank you. She said, for what? He said, for finding the program. For telling me about it. She said, I gave you information. What you did with it was your own work. He said, Eleanor. She looked at him. He said, you know that's not exactly true. She held the look for a moment. Then she said, go get the rake. The alley side is collecting leaves again. He went and got the rake. He came back and worked in the cold, and she sat in the kitchen where it was warm and watched from the window. And once when he looked up, she was not looking at the yard but at him, and her expression was the one he had only seen a few times in 2 years, the one that was underneath all the other expressions, unguarded and specific and full of something that did not need a word. January was harder, not catastrophically, not in a single event, but in the accumulated weight of a month that brought cold and diminishment in equal measure. Eleanor was on 3 medications now rather than 2, and the cardiologist had added a weekly check-in by phone, which she conducted with the same businesslike composure she brought to everything, but which Caleb could tell, from the way she mentioned it with slightly more deliberateness than the subject seemed to strictly require, that the weekly nature of the check-in was itself information. You check in weekly on things that need to be monitored. You monitor things that are uncertain. The cardiologist was not certain. She tired more easily. She did not say this. She showed it in the way she showed most things, not by performance, but by the adjustment of her behavior around it. She sat more often. She came to the back door rather than the steps on the colder mornings. She had stopped going to the grocery store herself and had arranged instead for the young woman at Birchwood Market to bring a weekly order, which Eleanor phoned in with the precision of a general managing supply lines, specific and efficient and accepting of no substitutions. She reported this to Caleb as a logistical update, not as a concession, and he received it as what she intended it to be. Patricia came again in February. This visit was longer than the October one and louder in the way that visits become louder when the thing being discussed has not changed despite repeated discussion. Caleb was not there for it. Eleanor told him the following Saturday. She sat in the kitchen chair rather than on the steps because the February cold had settled into something that made the steps impractical, and she held her coffee cup in both hands and reported the conversation with the measured tone of someone who has processed a thing fully before bringing it to the table. Patricia wanted to list the house. Not wanted exactly. Patricia had used the word considered, which Eleanor had identified immediately as the word people use when they have already decided something and want to present the deciding as ongoing. Patricia had considered that the house was large and the maintenance was becoming difficult to manage, and that the timing, with the heart situation being what it was, made the question of Eleanor's long-term independence something that needed to be addressed before it addressed itself. Eleanor had said she understood Patricia's concern. She had said she was grateful for it. She had said she was not listing the house. Patricia had said that gratitude was appreciated, but that this was a situation where the practical considerations needed to override the emotional ones. Eleanor had said, with a composure that Caleb privately thought must have taken significant effort, that she agreed entirely, which was why she was applying the practical consideration of her own judgment about her own life to the decision about her own home, and that the decision was no. He looked at his coffee. He said, "She's going to keep pushing." Eleanor said, "She is her father's daughter in some respects and my daughter in others, and the respects she gets from me include a certain persistence." She paused. "She gets the impatience from someone else." He almost smiled. He said, "Are you worried?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I am determined." He said, "That's not the same thing." She looked at him with the sharp eyes. She said, "No, it isn't." She said, "I am also worried." She said it the way she said the most honest things, simply and without performance, as a fact that deserved to be stated accurately. "I am worried that my body is making decisions I have not agreed to. I am worried that the window for doing what I need to do is smaller than I would like." She looked at her coffee. "I have things to attend to, Caleb. I am attending to them. But I would prefer more time than I am likely to get." He did not. Ask what things. She would tell him what she wanted him to know. That had been the understanding from the beginning, and it had always been enough. He came every Saturday through February and into March, and the camellia bloomed. It bloomed the way it always bloomed in March, with the extravagant reliability of something that has been rooted long enough to know its own season. Pink at the edges, white at the center, petals overlapping with the particular architectural confidence of a flower that is exactly what it is and makes no apologies for it. Eleanor had Caleb bring her garden chair to the south side of the yard on the first warm March Saturday so she could sit near it. She sat with her coffee and looked at it for a long time, and Caleb worked around her and did not break the quiet because the quiet was full of something that didn't need interruption. She said, "Thomas planted it the spring after we moved in. He drove to the nursery in Clearwater to get the variety he wanted because the one at Birchwood didn't carry it." She said, "He brought it home in the back seat of the car wrapped in burlap, worried the whole drive about the roots. He planted it that afternoon." She looked at it. "The first time it bloomed, I didn't see it coming. I came out one morning, and it was simply there." She paused. "He came and found me in the kitchen and brought me out to see it before he deadheaded it, because he knew that was the kind of thing I should see fresh." She said, "I have seen it every spring for 40 years since then." She did not say anything more. He went on working. The camellia held its bloom in the March light, pink and white and fully itself. He found the notebook in April. Not his own notebook, not the spiral-bound one he had been filling for 2 years. Another notebook, older, hard-bound in dark green cloth, sitting on the kitchen table when he came in from the back steps one Saturday morning, where Eleanor had left it with his name written on the top of a small folded note set on the cover. He stood at the table and read the note, which said simply, "This is what I know about this garden. I have been writing it down for 40 years. I thought you should have it." He opened it. Her handwriting, large and clear and precise, the handwriting of someone who had written on chalkboards for 22 years. Every plant, every planting date, every variety. The histories Thomas had told her of each one. The things that had worked and the things that hadn't and why. 40 years of paying attention to the same piece of ground. He stood at the table and held it for a long time. He brought it to the back steps, and she was in the garden chair, and he said, "You don't have to give me this." She said, "I'm not giving it away. I'm making sure it's kept somewhere it will be used." He said, "I don't understand the difference." She looked at him. She said, "A gift is about the giver. What I'm doing is about the garden." He thought about that. He sat down on the step and put the notebook carefully beside him. He said, "Eleanor." She said, "Don't make it into something it isn't." He said, "I'm going to anyway." She said, "I know." She said it with the exact tone she used for the things she had already accepted and was not fighting anymore. She looked at the camellia. He looked at it too. April was ending and the blooms were beginning to turn at the edges, the way they did at the end, not with drama, but with the quiet, natural conclusion of something that has been fully what it was and is now becoming the next thing. He thought of Thomas coming to get her from the kitchen. He thought of what it meant to understand what someone should see and to make sure they saw it. He stayed late that Saturday. He finished the spring bed turning and the pruning of the roses that Eleanor supervised from the chair with the same exacting attention she had always given it. And when he was done, she said, "Come and sit." He came and sat on the step near the chair. The afternoon was warm and the yard was freshly worked, and the smell of it was the smell of spring ground, dark and specific and full of what it was capable of becoming. She said, "I want you to know something." He waited. She said, "You have been here every Saturday for 2 years. Not almost every Saturday. Every one." She said it not with surprise, because she had been present for all of it, but with the deliberateness of someone stating a fact for the record. He said, "I know." She said, "I want you to know that I know, that I have known, every Saturday, that you were coming, that it was not taken for granted." He said, "It didn't need to be acknowledged." She said, "No, but it is being acknowledged anyway, because I want you to know that I am a person who notices." He looked at her. She was looking at the garden. He said, "I know you are." She said, "Good." She said, "When you go to Crestwood in September, you will be the right person in the right place. You will understand things about what you are studying that the other students will not understand yet, because you have been learning the real thing in the ground for 2 years." He said, "I've been learning from you." She said, "You've been learning from the garden." I just pointed. He said, "Eleanor." She said, "Don't argue with me. I have been pointing correctly at things for 22 years, and I know the difference between pointing and teaching." He said, "Yes, ma'am." May came in June. He prepared for Crestwood with the same methodical attention he brought to everything that mattered: the paperwork, the housing application, the list of what he needed to bring. His mother helped in the evenings at the kitchen table, the same table where they had sat with the scholarship letter, the same table where she had opened bills on Friday nights for 5 years, now covered with orientation materials and packing lists, and the practical architecture of a departure that she was performing with complete steadiness and felt in ways she did not show him except in the moments when she thought he wasn't paying attention, which he always was. Eleanor gave him the notebook's companion volume in July. Another hardbound book, newer, in blue cloth this time, with a note that said, "For what you learn at Crestwood, bring it back full." He held it for a moment. He said, "I'll bring it back." She said, "I know." She said it with the particular certainty she used for the things she was most sure of, and he did not examine what was underneath the certainty, because some things were better carried than examined too closely. August arrived with the finality that August always has, the last full month before the change, the heat still present, and the light already beginning its September lean without announcing it. He went every Saturday. He was more careful with the time now, more aware of it. The way you become aware of something you have always taken for granted when you begin to understand that taking it for granted is not something you can continue to do. On the second Saturday of August, she was not on the steps when he came. She was not at the kitchen door. He put the mower in the shed and went to the back door and knocked and waited and knocked again and stood there for a moment with a cold, specific feeling in his chest that he identified and then set aside, because panic was not useful. He went around to the front, and she was on the porch, in the porch chair, the one she had not used since spring, and she was looking at Caldwell Street with the expression of someone who has been sitting with a thought for a long time and has come to terms with it. He said, "You all right?" She said, "I'm having a slow day." He said, "Do you need anything?" She said, "I need you to do the back beds. The ageratum near the fence is getting out ahead of itself." He said, "I'll take care of it." She said, "I know." He went around and did the beds and the mowing, and he worked steadily and carefully, and when he was done, he came to the front porch and sat on the top step, and they sat together in the August afternoon, and she did not say anything, and he did not say anything, and the street was quiet, and the light was doing the gold long thing it did at that hour, and it was enough. It was exactly enough to simply be there. He left for Crestwood on the second Saturday of September. He did not leave without going to Caldwell Street first. He went on the Friday before, the day before his mother drove him to campus, and he knocked on the front door, and she opened it and looked at him in the doorway in the September morning light, and he said, "I'm going tomorrow." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm going to come back every time I'm home." She said, "I know that too." He said, "Franklin has my number." She said, "I told him to keep it." He looked at her in the doorway. He said, "The camellia is going to need specific attention in November before the cold, the same as last year. The covering needs to go on before the first freeze and not after." She said, "I know how to take care of my camellia." He said, "I know you do." She looked at him for a moment with the unguarded expression, the one underneath all the others. She said, "Caleb." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Go to school." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She put her hand briefly on his face the way his mother did. 2 seconds, not more. And then she dropped her hand, and he said goodbye, and she said goodbye, and he walked down the front path, and he did not look back, because looking back was not what either of them needed from him at that moment. He came back in October. Franklin called in November. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while Caleb was in the greenhouse at Crestwood, his hands in a flat of seedlings, learning the weight of the thing before it was a thing, and the phone buzzed in his pocket, and he answered it, and Franklin said, "She's in the hospital." He said it directly, the way his mother said the things that mattered. "Not bad," he said, "but she wanted you to know. She asked me to call you personally." She said, "Tell him I'll want a report on the ageratum in spring. Tell him I did not forget that he said he'd come back." He drove 3 hours on a Thursday to the hospital. He sat with her for 2 hours. She was in the bed with the small monitor on her wrist and the 4-line in the back of her hand, and she looked smaller than he had ever seen her look, and she was entirely herself, sharp and present, and paying full attention. She said, "You didn't have to come." He said, "Yes, I did." She said, "I'm fine." He said, "I know." She said, "The doctor says it was a warning, which is different from the thing itself." He said, "What does a warning require?" She said, "A month of enforced rest, which she intended to comply with entirely because she was not foolish, and a review of the medication protocol, and a conversation with her children about the practical logistics, which she intended to manage with the same composure she managed everything else." He said, "Patricia." She said, "Patricia and I have reached an understanding." He looked at her. She said, "I have agreed to a medical alert device and a home health aide on weekday mornings." She said it with the equanimity of someone who has done the calculation and reached the honest answer. It was not a concession. It was an accommodation of the real situation, which was different. He said, "That sounds right." She said, "I thought so." She looked at him across the hospital room. She said, "Now go back to school." He said, "I'll be back at Thanksgiving." She said, "I know. The garden will need the winter prep." He said, "I know." She said, "Good." He came at Thanksgiving. He came at Christmas. He came in February during the short break that the Crestwood schedule allowed. He did the garden each time, the seasonal tasks, the work that needed doing. The aide, whose name was Gloria, a woman in her 60s who had been doing home health work for 20 years and who possessed a practical competence that Eleanor respected deeply, was there on the weekday mornings, and on the Saturdays when Caleb was in town, she handed him the coffee already made when he came to the back door with the quiet solidarity of someone who understood what she was looking at. Eleanor was managing. She was more careful now, more deliberate, but she was present in all the ways that mattered. She had opinions about the winter pruning, and she communicated them from the kitchen window when the cold made the garden chair impractical. She called Franklin every Sunday at 2. She asked Caleb about Crestwood with the genuine interest of a teacher who has sent a student somewhere good and wants the full account. She asked about the greenhouse work and the soil science coursework and the professor who had told him in October that he had the best intuitive sense of root systems of any first-year student he had taught. She received this information with the expression of someone whose assessment has been confirmed for approximately the 3rd time and who finds this neither surprising nor undeserved. It was on a Saturday in March of his 2nd year at Crestwood that something changed in the quality of her presence. He was there for the spring break week, and he had come on Saturday morning and found her in the garden chair on the south side with the camellia behind her, the blooms fully open, pink and white in the March light. And she was sitting with her hands in her lap, and she was looking at the garden the way you look at something you are memorizing. Not because you are afraid of forgetting, because you want to carry it with you wherever you are going. He put the rake down. He came and sat on the step near the chair. She looked at him. She said, "This is a good year for the camellia." He said, "One of the best." She said, "The cold in January helped." He said, "You told me that, the dormancy." She said, "I did." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I've been thinking about the garden, about what it will need, about the timing of things." He said, "I'm coming back in May." She said, "I know." She said, "After Crestwood." He said, "Yes." She said, "You have thought about what comes after." He said, "I've been thinking about a small landscape practice in Morrow Creek." She looked at him. He said, "I thought about leaving, and then I thought about what I'd be leaving, and I decided the work I want to do is here." She said, "The work you want to do, or the reasons you want to stay?" He looked at the camellia. He said, "Both." She said, "Good." She said it with the particular completeness she gave to things she had been waiting a long time to hear. She said, That's good, Caleb, she said. I have finished what I needed to attend to. She said it with the quietness she used for the most important things. I want you to know that. He looked at her. She was looking at the camellia. She said, when Thomas was in the hospital at the end, I told him I had taken care of everything that needed taking care of and that he could rest. She paused. I want you to know the same thing. He said her name. She said, don't. Just listen. He was quiet. She said, you have been coming here every Saturday for the better part of 2 years and through every break since then. You have learned this garden as well as anyone alive except me. You have kept it exactly as it was meant to be kept. She said, that is not a small thing. That is a very large thing about who you are, and I have been paying attention to it since the first Saturday you pushed that mower through the gate. He looked at the garden. She said, the fig tree is going to need the early pruning this year. Don't let it go past the last week of February next year, or the new growth will be compromised. He said, I know. She said, I know you know. She was quiet again. The garden was quiet. The March light was the particular light that comes just after the camellia blooms, warm enough to be hopeful, but not yet certain of itself. He sat with her in it. She died in June. It was a quiet death, a Tuesday morning. Gloria arriving at 7:30 and finding her in the bedroom where she had slept for 41 years, as peaceful as a person could be. Franklin called Caleb first. He called before he called Patricia. He said, she asked me to make sure you knew before the rest of it started. He said rest of it with the particular weight of a man who knows what comes after a death when there is a house and a garden and 2 children who did not always agree on things. He said, she thought you would want some time before. He said, she was right about most things. He was crying, quietly and with dignity, the way his mother's son would cry. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed in his dormitory room at Crestwood and held the phone and looked at the wall. He said, tell me about Tuesday morning. Franklin told him. It was peaceful. It was in her own house, in her own bed, which was exactly what she had wanted and exactly what had happened, and that was a grace that not everyone was given, and Caleb understood it as such. He drove to Morrow Creek the next day. He went to Caldwell Street before he went anywhere else. He stood at the front gate for a moment, and then he opened it and walked up the front path, and he went around back and stood in the garden in the June morning. The camellia was long past bloom, but the roses were in their full summer, and the fig tree was leafed out completely with the settled authority of something whose roots ran deeper than anything above the ground could fully account for, and the ageratum near the fence was, as it always was by June, getting ahead of itself. He walked the perimeter slowly. He touched the bark of the fig tree the way you touch something that has outlasted everything else. He looked at where the camellia was, where it would be in March, pink and white and fully itself, rooted in the place Thomas had chosen for it 40 years ago. He stood in the June garden and let himself feel the full weight of it, the loss and the beauty and the continuity of a place that had been tended long enough to carry the character of everyone who had tended it. The funeral was on a Friday. He sat with Franklin. Patricia was there with her husband, and her careful composure and the specific quality of grief that belongs to a person who has not always been present and understands, standing at a graveside, that the ledger is now permanently what it was. Franklin held himself with the same steadiness his mother had carried, upright and present, and doing the honest work of loss without performing it. Afterward, he put his hand on Caleb's shoulder in the parking lot and said, she left instructions. The attorney will contact you next week. He said it plainly, as information, the way his mother would have said it. He said, I want you to know before you hear it officially that I was aware of her decision and I agreed with it completely. Caleb looked at him. He said, I don't know what you mean. Franklin said, I know you don't. He said, that was part of how she knew. The letter came on a Tuesday. A cream envelope in the mailbox at his dormitory address at Crestwood, which meant she had written down the address at some point without telling him, which was exactly the kind of thing she would do. His name on the front in her large, clear handwriting. He held it for a long time before he opened it. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dormitory room with the June light coming through the window and the campus quiet in the early evening, and he held the envelope and thought about a Saturday morning in June 2 years ago when he had pushed a mower through an alley gate and knocked on a back door because the grass needed doing and he could do it. He thought about lemonade on the back steps. He thought about the blue notebook and the green one and the doorway conversations and the camellia in March and the fig tree's roots running deeper than anything above the ground could account for. He thought about 41 years of two people paying attention to the same piece of ground. He thought about what she had said in the garden in March. I have finished what I needed to attend to. He opened the letter. The letter said she was leaving him the house on Caldwell Street and everything in it, including the garden, including the shed, including 41 years of careful roots. The attorney read it aloud at the will reading the following week. Patricia sat very still. Franklin looked at his hands. The letter said simply, he came back every Saturday because it was right. That is the only qualification that ever mattered. Caleb returned to Morrow Creek that September. He opened a small landscape practice on Birchwood Road. He tended the garden every week. The camellia bloomed in March, exactly as it always had. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.